Okay, let's unpack this. This surprising and, well, often destructive relationship between architecture and fire.
Yeah, it's something you don't always connect immediately, do you?
Not really.
Mm.
But then you look at, the recent tragedies, the Grenfell Tower, the Glasgow School of Art fires.
Ugh, those awful wildfires near Athens, the National Museum in Brazil. Heartbreaking.
Exactly. And these events just throw this harsh light on this continuous, almost terrifying dance between the buildings we make and the ever-present threat of fire.
Mm-hmm. And it's a relationship that goes way back. I mean, right back to the very first shelters humans built.
Right. While the headlines grab onto these modern disasters, it really echoes a history that's, well, millennia old. Fire's always been this kind of shadow over our built environment.
It really has.
And that's what we're really diving into today. We've got this fascinating research paper that looks into how architecture, our cities, and we as a society collectively remember and respond to this constant risk.
So think of this as your shortcut, maybe. A way to get a deep understanding of this complex interplay.
Yeah, we're pulling out the key insights,
Yeah.
the most interesting bits, and trying to connect them all up for you.
Our mission today, really, is to get a clear picture of this whole thing, how our buildings and cities carry the memory of fire, and how that memory shapes, well, everything from design to fire prevention.
Okay, so let's start with this core idea of memory itself. The paper mentions the archive of memory, but it's not just like dusty old files in a basement.
No, not at all. It brings in this really interesting angle from Derrida, linking the archive to how our own minds work.
You mean like how we inscribe things, store them, retrieve memories, almost like a subconscious library?
Exactly. It's a crucial starting point because it just broadens the whole definition of what an archive even is. It's not just a place, it's this dynamic system of remembering.
And if you connect that to the bigger picture, then things like listed buildings, they function almost like architectural archives, don't they?
Precisely. They're intentionally preserved to hold on to specific bits of the past, consciously embodying memory in, brick and mortar.
It's like they're designed to remember. And it's not just the grand historical stuff either.
No, the paper mentions an artist, Lois Weinberger. He did this amazing archival research right in the attic of his family home.
Oh, yeah. What did he do?
Just sifted through generations of stuff, accumulated things. His debris field installation became this incredible collection of everyday objects. It turned the building itself into this living, breathing archive of domestic life.
Wow. Which makes you wonder, whose memory are we actually talking about?
Well, the paper brings in Hal Bloch's theory of collective memory here.
Okay.
He suggests that both our individual memories and the shared memories of a group, like a community, operate with a similar logic, especially when you think about architecture.
So a building holds personal memories for me, maybe, but it also adds to the wider collective memory of a place, a city.
Exactly. Layers of memory essentially baked into our buildings and cities.
Okay, so we've got these layers.
Yeah.
But how does this actually play out in something practical, like, say, preservation?
Well, the paper looks at Bergson here and his idea of two types of memory.
Right, habit memory and what was the other one?
Representational memory. Habit memory is like automatic skills, muscle memory almost. Representational memory stores our personal experiences as these vivid images.
Okay, got it.
And what's fascinating with Bergson is his idea that recollection is the act of bringing those memory images into the present.
So when we conserve a building, we're not just fixing bricks.
No, you're actively trying to bring a specific image of the past back to life. Think about restoring a facade to how it looked 100 years ago. That's a very deliberate act of architectural recollection, bringing that memory image forward.
That makes perfect sense. But it also raises a slightly tricky point, doesn't it? The idea that conservation itself might also be a form of forgetting.
How so?
Well, if we focus on preserving certain aspects, are we inevitably letting other parts of the story just fade away?
That's a really sharp point. Every conservation decision involves selection. We prioritize certain stories, certain styles.
And in doing that, we might, maybe inadvertently, push other stories to the margins.
Exactly. The architectural archive, just like any archive, is never completely neutral or, comprehensive.
Right, so we're seeing this intricate dance between memory and architecture. Now, the deep dive shifts focus a bit to the other key element, fire.
Yes, fire. It introduces Bachelard and his psychoanalytic take on it.
And he contrasts his idea of fragmented time with Bergson's view, right? Bergson saw time as more continuous.
He did. Bachelard saw fire as more than just, a physical process. He saw it as this really powerful symbol in our psychology.
Okay.
And his idea of fragmented time, the sense that time is broken up by moments of disruption, is very different from Bergson's smooth, unbroken flow.
And how does that difference relate to Bachelard's ideas about knowledge?
Well, that difference kind of underpins his whole idea about how we come to know things.
Yeah.
For Bachelard, gaining knowledge isn't just steady accumulation. He saw it as dialectical, a constant process of saying no to what we thought we knew before. Progress happens through these breaks with the past.
Okay, I think I follow. But where does fire fit in?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Bachelard argued that fire, as one of the first things humans really contemplated, is actually at the very root of scientific thinking itself.
Wow. So fire isn't just this destructive thing we fight. It's somehow fundamental to how we even learn and understand the world.
Precisely. The paper even brings in Vernant's take on the Prometheus myth to really underline this link between fire and knowledge.
Prometheus stealing fire.
Yeah, it wasn't just about getting a useful tool. It symbolized acquiring practical skills, know-how, but then Zeus's punishment, sending Pandora.
Introduce this complex, maybe problematic side effect to the new power.
Right.
Like fire itself.
Exactly, this inherent duality. Incredible potential, but also risk. Unforeseen consequences.
The deep dive also touches on Heraclitus, doesn't it? His view of fire as this constantly changing, transformative element.
Yes, and the idea that conflict is essential to how the universe works. Heraclitus saw fire as the fundamental principle of constant change. Everything's in flux.
Driven by opposing forces.
And fire, in its constant burning and reshaping, embodies that perfectly.
Bachelard even coined that term, the Empedocles complex, right?
Yeah.
To describe our mixed feelings about fire warmth and terror, creation, destruction.
It's such a vivid idea. Fire gives life, warmth, but also holds the potential for utter devastation. This duality shapes how we relate to it, and by extension, architecture and safety.
The paper also mentions Fraser's anthropological work on myths about how fire originated.
How those stories often reflect early attempts to make sense of and control this incredibly powerful force.
And these myths often link fire to rituals, like fire festivals, purification, renewal, sometimes burning effigies.
It's like acting out this cycle symbolically. These festivals can be seen as collective ways of trying to manage fire's power, harness the transformation, keep the destruction at bay.
Burning an effigy, maybe a way to symbolically use fire to get rid of something harmful.
Could be. It's all about managing that power.
Okay, so we've got the archive of memory, this dialectic of fire and knowledge. How has architecture itself actually responded to this relationship over time, from the earliest shelters to now?
Right, this is where it gets really practical. The paper talks about Semper's idea of the hearth as the moral element of architecture.
The moral element.
Yeah, the central point in early dwellings, everything organized around it. Fire wasn't just practical warmth, cooking it was symbolic, a gathering place, even religious.
Like Hestia's eternal flame in ancient Greece and the Britannian.
Exactly, the heart of the city, or Vesta in Rome, and the sacred fire, the mundus. Fire was central symbolically and physically.
Incredible. But the accessibility of fire changed massively, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The invention of phosphorus matches in the 1600s, a real game changer.
How so?
Suddenly, fire wasn't something you had to carefully nurture. It became easily available almost everywhere. And that fundamentally altered its relationship with the spaces we live in.
And heating systems evolved too, from simple hearths to Roman hypocausts, then central heating.
The paper mentions figures like Snodgrass, Strutt, Bonamain, and shows illustrations of early systems like greenhouse heating, Strutt's stove.
Even the heating in Wakefield Asylum and Pentonville Prison?
What's fascinating there is how these innovations made buildings more comfortable, sure, but also gradually concealed fire within the structure.
Hidden away.
Yeah, from open flames in a hearth, fire became something piped through walls, under floors, less of a direct presence in daily life.
And now, with sustainability being such a focus, we're seeing another huge shift, right? Moving away from combustion altogether.
Definitely. Using alternative energy, solar, wind, hydro. Sustainable architecture is essentially trying to break that direct link between buildings and burning fuel.
Replacing it with energy from natural sources. The paper mentions Le Corbusier's Brise Soleil, even Socrates thinking about building orientation way back when.
Right. Designing with the sun to reduce the need for artificial heating and cooling. It's a significant turning point. In a way, the memory of fire within the building is being intentionally erased.
Okay, the deep dive then introduces this idea of architecture as a thermodynamic system, linking material organization to information and memory. That sounds quite abstract.
It is a bit, but it's a powerful way to think about how buildings last over time. Basically, a building needs energy input to maintain its structure, to resist decay entropy, the second law of thermodynamics.
So the energy needed is like the effort needed for conservation, preserving its memory of form.
Kind of, yeah. It takes external energy to maintain that organized form against the tendency towards disorder.
And then there's Bataille's idea of the excess of energy,
Yeah.
how fire in architecture becomes destructive. He uses the example of lodgepole pines.
Right, trees that have actually evolved to need fire for regeneration. Bataille highlights the inherent risks in harnessing energy. Just as fire brings warmth, an uncontrolled excess leads to destruction.
Even our sophisticated systems can be overwhelmed.
Exactly, that energy can overwhelm the controls.
Which leads us nicely to memory in materials and forms. The paper talks about Raphael Samuel's idea that the materials themselves carry memories.
Yes, like brick in London after the Great Fire, how it became associated with tradition, stability.
And developers use that later in gentrification projects.
Precisely. Samuel shows how materials evoke these historical cultural associations. Brick carries connotations of permanence, history, used deliberately to create a feeling.
And it contrasts brick with concrete, referencing Gropius's memorial, the Fosse Arditine Massacre Memorial, showing concrete can also carry powerful meaning.
Absolutely. Concrete with its potential for monolithic forms, textures, it can embody collective effort, even tragedy. It shows all materials contribute to the memory of a place, just differently.
Then the discussion moves to architectural typology, thinking about building types after modernism. Argon's views, the difference between type and prototype.
Typology, studying building types based on form and function, is another way memory operates. Modernism initially pushed away from historical types towards a universal prototype.
But Argon argued for something more nuanced.
Yeah, understanding type as an abstract idea that still carries echoes of the past, but allows for adaptation, reinterpretation.
So even these abstract ideas of types depend on how we see architecture, how our memory categorizes things, like language classifies the world.
Exactly that. Recognizing a building as a certain type involves memory, comparison. We draw on past experience to make sense of the present.
And Bachelard pops up again here. His idea of architectural evolution punctuated by temporal deaths, fire catastrophes leading to new knowledge, new construction.
For Bachelard, these disasters aren't just setbacks. They're ruptures that force us to learn, rebuild, incorporating new knowledge, new safety measures. Fire becomes a catalyst for progress, tragically.
Which brings us to architecture on fire, prevention and response. It starts with the basics, the fire tetrahedron stages of combustion.
Yeah, a good reminder. Smoldering, smoke, incandescence, flaming. Understanding the science is crucial for protection.
Knowing how fire develops helps with prevention and suppression strategies. And the paper highlights the danger of fire spread, especially flashover.
Flashover sounds terrifying. That sudden, almost explosive spread through a whole room.
It really emphasizes how dangerous fire can be in enclosed spaces. Unpredictable.
It does. And in response, we've developed increasingly sophisticated firefighting bodies throughout history.
From the Romans, Familia Publica, Vigiles, they had surprisingly advanced gear for their time, didn't they?
They did. Water carriers, pump supervisors, roof lifters. Then organized services after industrialization, the Great Fire of London.
And insurance companies played a role early on in Britain, too.
Yes, they had their own brigades initially. It's fascinating how these forces evolved with cities, even influencing urban planning where stations go, fire hydrants.
The paper mentions London's LSP5 as an example of strategy impacting city layout.
And as understanding grew, protection became integrated into buildings. Active systems, sprinklers, alarms, fire doors.
The paper makes that interesting comparison to the cyborg idea, like buildings get automated defenses.
Yeah, it's a compelling analogy. But despite all that, Grenfell Tower.
Such a stark, tragic reminder. Failures in regulations, materials,
Yeah.
catastrophic consequences, the incredibly rapid spread.
The public inquiry, BRE, Global's findings on the cladding, other issues. Grenfell was a failure on so many levels.
It just underscores how vital robust regulations are and proper enforcement. The inquiry showed systemic problems, windows, cavity barriers, the cladding itself, all contributing to that devastating spread.
Which leads into the discussion on building regulations themselves. The paper mentions the 2000 regs in England as an example.
covering everything from escape routes, emergency lighting, ventilation.
These regs are essentially our codified memory of past fires, our collective attempt to prevent future tragedies, an ongoing learning process, constantly adapting as we learn more, unfortunately, often through new disasters.
But there's also that tension, isn't there, between necessary regulations and architectural creativity.
Definitely. The paper highlights examples like the Party Wall Project, the Brick House, where restrictions actually spurred innovation.
Constraints driving creativity. Architects finding inventive ways to meet regs while still achieving their vision.
Exactly. It can be a powerful driver.
And finally, this section touches on ongoing research, calculating heated combustion, heat release rates, fire testing methods. It's a whole scientific field.
And that research provides the evidence base for regulations and technology. Understanding how materials burn, how fire spreads, lets us create much more effective prevention.
And it brings us back full circle almost to Bachelard's perspective, seeing these catastrophes as temporal deaths that grimly provide knowledge for the future.
It's a sobering thought, isn't it? Progress in fire safety often propelled by tragedy, forcing us to confront vulnerabilities and learn from devastating losses.
The deep dive wraps up with a psychoanalytic conclusion for conservation, a really thought-provoking end.
Yeah, it connects our modern obsession with memory, with conservation, to anxieties about the future. This duty to remember, as Nora calls it.
In a world changing so fast, we try to hold on to the past for stability.
That seems to be the idea. It delves into the deeper psychological drives behind wanting to preserve the built environment.
And it revisits Derrida's link between archive theory and psychoanalysis, the life and death drives. How does that apply to architectural conservation?
Well, the paper proposes this really interesting idea, viewing conservation through the lens of the death drive,
Meaning,
suggesting that maybe our desire to destroy certain buildings, perhaps some post-war architecture we find ugly or uncomfortable, might be a release of this drive, linked to trauma, unwanted memories maybe.
wow, like Hatherley's views on conserving modernism or those City on Fire art installations, expressions of this tension.
Possibly. So our choices about what to conserve and what to let go might be influenced by these unconscious drives, this push and pull between creation and destruction.
The paper even suggests that focusing conservation only on the exceptional might reflect releasing the death drive towards the ordinary buildings around us.
Exactly. Our selective memory, individually and collectively, shapes our environment. What we choose to preserve reflects historical value, sure, but maybe also deeper desires to remember certain things and forget others.
And the final thought, that real progress in architecture and conservation comes from this interplay of life and death drives. Destruction isn't always purely negative.
Echoing Freud's idea about civilization developing by managing innate aggression, the paper mentions Alfredo Jar's Skohall Constal as this visual representation opening and closing, creation alongside potential destruction.
Ultimately, our relationship with fire and how we respond in architecture and conservation is deeply tied to these fundamental human drives. Building and preserving are both shaped by this tension.
Yeah, creation and destruction, always in play.
So just to recap quickly, we've explored this long, really complex history of architecture and fire being intertwined.
The absolutely crucial role memory plays in shaping our built environment, how we respond to fire.
And this constant tension between destruction and the human desire for preservation.
What's truly fascinating is how these different threads, memory, fire, architecture, are all deeply interconnected, constantly influencing each other in ways we might not always realize.
And that brings us to our final thought for you listening. How does our understanding of fire, this incredibly powerful transformative element, really shape the way we design and remember our buildings, our cities?
What should we consciously choose to forget as time moves on? And what must we absolutely preserve in the face of this ever-present force?
It's definitely something to keep in mind as you move through the built world around you.
We really encourage you to think more about this complex, really fascinating relationship between architecture, memory, and fire.